for attending ITSM Academy's monthly reputation. My name is Karen Skiles, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Today, we're pleased to have Michael Cardinal, Practice Manager with Tech Systems, joining us. Mike's presentation is titled Service Portfolio, Preparing for the Future of Your Organization. We've got quite a few registrations for today's webinar, so let's give everyone a few minutes to get logged in and settled. Some of you may have firewalls blocking you from accessing the Citrix webinar tool that we use. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, you can download the slides directly from the link in the chat box or from our website at www.itsmacademy.com/webinar-archives. And be sure to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for the latest ITSM Academy updates and specials, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more free webinars and inspiration. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. I'll be right back.
Hi, Karen. Hi, Mike. It's Lisa. Karen, are you there? Oh, I hope Karen's not having audio problems because I have a head cold and no one wants me doing this. Hi, Sheila. It is, we are waiting for our hostess with the mostest, Karen, to come back. I think she might be having some audio.
Good morning.
And let me launch that now. And everyone, you should be seeing your polling question. And we have 59% voted, and I'm still sorry all, just killing another moment, hoping that my Karen comes back to me.
I'm here, Lisa.
So I'm gonna let that, oh good, yay. So we're at 71% voted. I'm gonna go ahead and close that down. And Karen, can you see that to review it with Mike?
I can.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, Mike, so 53% by far in the lead at ad hoc and immature, followed by 28% developed but not being used effectively, followed by 19% with no portfolio.
So those results are not surprising, thank you.
Okay. I was surprised that there was 0 on the other two, though. That would kind of surprised me. Okay. We're going to be tweeting during the presentation, and if you'd like to join in, please use hashtag AskITSM. And during the webinar, the information that Mike presents may raise some questions for you, or you might be looking for some additional clarification or information. So we do have a Q&A session scheduled with Mike at the end of his presentation, and just submit your questions using the question feature that appears in your GoToWebinar control panel, which is located in the upper right of your screen unless you've moved it. And just type your question and click the send button. And feel free to submit your questions at any time during the webinar. We'll just answer them all at the end of Mike's presentation. And the presentation and the Q&A are being recorded and will be made available to you on our website by the end of business tomorrow. And I want to thank you for sharing the information with Mike on what your experience has been with the portfolio to this point, because that will help him with his presentation today. So we're ready to get started. And those of you who are new to ITSM Academy, here's a quick overview. ITSM Academy is a full service provider of IT service management education. We develop most content in-house. Our portfolio includes ITIL, Agile, Service Management, DevOps, Process Design, and Verisum. Since 2003, we've trained and certified tens of thousands of students. Now let's introduce today's speaker, Michael Cardle. Mike has over 18 years experience in IT and education, having worked as a manager, consultant, analyst, trainer, and teacher. He is a practice manager, an ITIL expert, and a certified process design engineer. Mike's resume spans several industries, including insurance, manufacturing, retail, food service, and education. He has also spent 20 years as an adjunct instructor and trainer, has spoken at many IT and academic events, and has published white papers on how to begin an IT service management implementation. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Karen. Good morning, everyone. I think I need a new bio. I think you've read that so many times now, Karen. I need to give you something new.
You can. I think I have it memorized. I'm going to make you a presenter. You ready, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. I want to, I've got several monitors going on here, so I want to make sure I get the right one.
Okay.
All right. And let's go full screen. All right. Are we ready?
Perfect. Yep.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you once again for allowing me to come into your space, into your ears, as it were, to talk to you about some topic related to service management. Always love working with the folks at ITSM Academy. They are near and dear to my heart, as probably many of you know. So today we're going to be talking about this concept of service portfolio, and it's a topic that people kind of know maybe or think about, but I want to kind of talk about it a little bit maybe different than people would sort of think about it, and just kind of give you some ideas and some thoughts around that. I'm going to use an analogy that might be a little surprising throughout, but hopefully you can follow along. So service portfolio, one of the service strategy processes and mechanisms, is really something that people don't put as much effort maybe into as they should. We get a lot of people talking about in the service management world about the catalog, but the catalog is really part of this bigger entity called the service portfolio, and that's what we want to look at, is this sort of stepping stone or foundational piece that allows you to prepare your organization for the future. So here am I, as Karen said, CPDE expert, many years of experience in all this, and many of you probably listened to my webinars before. Wood turner. I'm actually doing a lot of other different kind of woodworking as well lately, so expanding my repertoire there. Still have the fancy mustache though. All right, and if there are any issues as we go along, please chat those into Karen so she can take care of those, and let her know if there's any audio issues on my part or any kind of technical issues. Also, start chatting in any questions that you have for the Q&A session. So what do we want to talk about today? Well, what we want to talk about is this thing called the portfolio. Why do we want it? Why is it important? Understand the need to have a effective service definition to make a successful portfolio, talk about how we implement or start getting that service portfolio into a usable situation or a usable position, and then talk about how do we maintain it over time. So the service portfolio is in many ways like the Titanic, and this is the analogy that I want to use throughout, and it's an analogy that I've used before in the classes that I've taught. So I indicate if only the White Star Line had used portfolio management with the Titanic. The White Star Line was the organization that owned and built, at the time, the two largest steamships, the Titanic and its sister ship, the Olympic, and were responsible for the building, the launching, manning, and ultimately sinking of the Titanic. So April 15th, 1912, the Titanic went to the bottom of the North Atlantic. Now, did that have to happen? No, it really didn't. And I've always used this analogy around the Titanic and portfolio management in that if the owners of the White Star Line had used something like portfolio management, which is really a technique and a mechanism to help you sort of prepare for the future, they probably could have avoided the iceberg. In fact, I argue that they probably would have avoided the iceberg. And that is because the owners of the White Star Line, the crew of the ship, all knew that there were icebergs and an ice field that they were headed towards 2 days before they reached it. Yeah, 2 full days. Now, the Titanic is not a small ship, or was not a small ship. Today, it's really considered fairly small because our modern cruise liners are far bigger than the Titanic. But even with that, it was not an easy ship to turn, and so the ship itself, given 2 days, could have easily steered further south from the ice, missed the icebergs, and made it into port. And I always said in the movie Titanic, I would have loved that if they could have put some alternative endings where it actually made it into New York and everybody lived and happily ever after. That would have been awesome. But the reality was it did not project into the future as well as it could. It did not use the information available to it. And it was being driven by sort of short-term thinking, short-term goals, the here, the now, a desire by the owners of the White Star Line, particularly a gentleman named Bruce Ismay, the sort of the head of the program there, to make New York as fast as they could, right? So he didn't take into consideration the environment and the conditions and everything else that was available and the information available to him and to the crew to make the right decisions to simply steer around the ice. So that's kind of where we want to go. So the portfolio itself is a mechanism, right? It's a tool, and as with all tools, it's an enabler. It allows us to accomplish things by making things more effective, more efficient, more economical. The mechanism itself is not as important as what you do with the information within it. Now, the information I have on the slide is really just taken from ITIL itself, the basic definition of what a portfolio is, right? So it's all of the services that you have, that you're managing, that you're governing, put into a single location that tells you sort of why do you have this service, what's the value of it, what are you going to do with it, where are you going to take it? And that's really perhaps the most important kind of questions that need to be answered, right? So helps you answer things like, why do we exist? Why are we in business? What is our business? What is it that we do to achieve the outcomes and the desires of our customers? What makes us different from other people? What's our SWOT, right? Our strengths, weaknesses, all of that. And then how should we be thinking about where our time, money, energy, effort should go? And this is all in anticipation of the future. So I always differentiate the catalog from the portfolio in that the catalog is really about the here and the now. What do we offer today? What do we offer in the next week, maybe in the next month? The portfolio is more about what are we going to offer in the future? What are we going to do for the future? What are we going to do 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years, 5 years, 10, 15, 50 years from now? That's really what the portfolio is about. And that's why I think that the analogy of the Titanic works well, because an organization is not quick to turn, but given enough time and enough preview and enough forward thinking with the Titanic, they could have turned the boat, right? Just turn the boat. It was pretty easy to steer the wheel to one side, miss the ice field. But given that there was short-term thinking versus long-term thinking, the result was the sinking of the ship and the loss of several thousand lives.
Excuse me, Mike. Mike,
Oh,
can you go back to that slide 1 second?
Yeah.
On the bottom, In the blue banner, it says service portfolio management articulates how the prospective position plan and we can't see the rest of it. What's the rest of that sentence?
Oh, patterns. So those are the 4 P's of service strategy.
Thank you.
And I apologize, I don't know why it's cutting off at the bottom there, but those are the 4 P's of service strategy, and allows you to kind of project into the future, right? So that's what those 4 things do. It's all about where are you today, where do you want to be, right? I started in Liverpool with the ship, I wanted to be in New York, how do I get there, right? And what are the things I'm going to encounter along that journey? Hopefully you can see the bottom of this one a little better. So it really is that tool to kind of project into the future by understanding what you're doing today, what has happened in the past. So it's really a tool that allows you to kind of see past, present, and future, and to know the conditions and the environment into which you're going so you can make the right decisions. Right, so that's really what the portfolio is about. That's really what sort of steering the Titanic was about as well. So if you kind of think about, I can't necessarily change things very quickly, but if I'm given that time frame like I talked about, I can make the right decisions now to project into the future. And it's really about having balance. A big concept in service management and ITIL is this concept of balance, right? I don't want to go too fast. I don't want to go too slow. I want to make the right decisions at the right time for the right reasons, and not have to wait until that last second and try to move this giant ship away from this iceberg, away from whatever barriers or risks or challenges are facing my organization. But that's the tendency that we have. We set our sights on some goal. We make a promise to people, oh, we're going to hit New York by this date, or we're going to do this project by this time, or we're going to stay within this budget. And most of the time, it doesn't work. And that's because you're not sort of anticipating the future and making the changes now so that you can avoid those barriers in the first place. So this is some key information, right? It's all about how to translate the information that you have in the portfolio into making decisions. So the portfolio is really an important decision-making tool. I'll get to that in just a moment, but it gives you a picture, an overarching picture. It's kind of like standing on a hill looking down into a river valley. I can see the whole sweep of the river. I can see where it starts. I can see where it ends. I can make decisions about things happening around that flow. Again, the idea of the Titanic. I can project, you know, where are my barriers? Where are the difficult waters that I have ahead? Allows me to make the choices, make the investments now for that future. The other thing that it does is allows you to, as I said, sort of avoid some mistakes. And 2 of the mistakes that organizations make without a portfolio or effectively using a portfolio is, 1, they design the organization before they know what their services are. I call that bottom up. Right, so they do bottom-up design. They say, here's what we're capable of today, here's what we have, here's what we do, let's build services around those. Rather than saying, where are we going, what are we trying to achieve, how are we going to get there, all of those sort of the 4 P questions, right? What is our perspective, what's our position, plans, and patterns? How are we going to make that journey? Then, as a result of those choices, the organizational design becomes most often patently clear. The second kind of thing that it does is causes organization to break a long-standing golden rule of mine, no tools before the rules. So they go out thinking, I'm going to buy a tool that's going to make all of life better, and the reality is it's not. Right, and that was kind of the Titanic as well. The owners of the White Star Line, you know, said if we build a bigger, faster, more amazing ship, it's going to revolutionize things. It's going to make life so much better in traveling across the globe, and the world's going to be fine. And what they realized is it didn't turn out that way. Right, so they weren't kind of thinking through some things. They made some shortcuts in building, and they made some choices that ultimately caused the sinking of that ship. So if you're not familiar with the portfolio and its structure, here's kind of how it sits. The portfolio is one of many tools that sits inside our service knowledge management system. And for me, it's really probably the core decision-making tool for knowledge, right? It contains those three parts: the pipeline, the catalog, and retired services. And as you can see, the idea is that as services come in through the pipeline, they feed into the catalog, which then feeds into the retired services. And there's a bit of overlap between these three. So you can't really look at the portfolio only as a catalog. You have to look at it as these three parts that are interconnected. The portfolio then sits on top of vast amounts of information that service feeds. Things like a portfolio of what your applications are, your CMS, your resource portfolio, your customer portfolio, all of these things feeding in to help you make decisions. And the decisions about where you should be going, the pace, the direction, all of these important sort of steering questions. I do want to point out that there is a difference between the catalog as described in the portfolio and something that people often confuse with that, which is really a request menu or a request catalog. So many tools, particularly one like ServiceNow, has this thing called the service catalog. If you look at the definitions, it's not really a service catalog. It's a request menu. I can go out and I can order some kind of laptop, or I can ask for some kind of standard change. There is a connection between that request catalog and the service catalog, but the service catalog is really a marketing tool. It allows you to preview and show what you can do, how you can do it, where you can do it for your customers. And it's really a key part of your portfolio in decision making, as opposed to here's what you can order. So it is a bit of a menu, but it's more importantly a marketing tool. The key part of the portfolio are services. You cannot have a service portfolio if you don't have services defined. You have an empty shell. And you're not going to make any effective use of that portfolio. So the key thing to start with is defining your services. Other webinars have been done on defining services. ITIL's got all sorts of guidance on that. Just wanted to kind of quickly remind you of what those are, right? Services are those value propositions that you're offering customers. And with the Titanic, the value proposition was a good one. Hey, we can get you to New York quicker. We can get you to New York in more luxury. We can get you to New York or wherever the future would hold in terms of destination in a more effective, efficient, and economical way than the current offerings available. So it was those value propositions that were driving the creation. It just kind of went awry from that point on, right? There wasn't effective use of the information that was available to the White Star Line. So three types of services, right? Your core stuff, that's the ones that customers are expecting, they're paying for. Your enhancing and enabling services support then, giving you the capabilities to do that. And it's not about going out and having to sort of organize all your services in this way. It's just thinking about what is it you do, the bread and butter of your organization versus the things that are the nice to haves and the things that are sort of behind the scenes. From ITIL, here's how you go out and define services again. I don't want to spend a long time on this because there's other options or other knowledge areas to gain on how to define services. But it's basically you go out, who are your customers, what are the outcomes that people are trying to achieve. So your customers could have, for the White Star Line for the Titanic, were anywhere from the very rich and famous, the Astor family, down to your steerage people, your below decks, poorer people. So they had a whole range of customer markets that they served. What were the outcomes? Achieving New York in a short time, a nice ride, those kind of things. Understand what the services are themselves, the market spaces, put your service models together, and then put all that information into your portfolio. So once I have this sort of portfolio built, and again, it's not about the mechanisms, it's about collecting information about your services, and I'll get into that here in just a second, the kinds of information you want. But once I've sort of gotten this idea and defined what my portfolio is going to look like, I now have to implement it. And here's a picture of the Titanic being built. It's in dry dock here in Ireland. It was actually built in Ireland, launched from Liverpool officially. But the question, that a lot of people asked is, hey, there's this giant ship bigger than anything anyone had ever seen in the water. Will it float? And the idea was that in the design, at least, they built the ship so that it was really supposedly unsinkable, right? That was the vision. The problem was they made shortcuts. They didn't make effective use of information. And the particular shortcut that caused much of the angst is the watertight containers within the ship. So the ship was built sort of in these big sections, which ships are still built that way today. They're sort of big modular sections with bulkheads between them. And the idea was that once water got into one of these sections, it could then be stopped from going to another section. The problem is the walls that they built did not go from floor to ceiling. They did not go from the bottom of the ship all the way up to the deck. And so as the water started to flood into one compartment, it simply went up the wall and over the top and filled up the next one and the next one and the next one. And again, these are decisions and choices that were made in a short-term money-saving kind of thing, right? That the owner said, hey, we don't want to spend money on that. That's too much. This is already expensive. They also cut the number of lifeboats out, right? Oh, that's too expensive. It's too much money. So again, short-term thinking instead of what is our goal? Our goal is to reach New York safely, effectively, quickly, and with all passengers happy. So how do we do that? How do we take a portfolio when we implement it? Well, ITIL gives us the answer. The answer to implementing anything in ITIL is to follow the implementation approach. Now, many of you might recognize this as the CSI approach because it is the same thing. And in fact, if you don't know the history of ITIL, one of the things that you might recognize is in the earlier versions of ITIL, particularly version 2, there was a book called Planning to Implement. And if you haven't looked at it, you might want to try to go find it. I think there's some fire sales going on. In fact, the Academy bookstore may have a few copies of the old book. I don't know. But you can check for that. And basically the chapters of the book are these questions. So the first chapter is what is the vision? The second chapter, where are we now? So this is your implementation cycle for anything. If you want to implement a process, you want to implement a tool, you want to implement a service management as a whole, you use this approach. So start with the vision. What is it that your company wants to do? Why do you exist? Where do you want to go? Where do you get that information from? From the business. You can also get it from the portfolio itself. So the information you're gathering for the portfolio itself. Then where are we now? What kind of information do we have about our services? Which things are lacking? Where do we want to be? Along this journey from New York or from Liverpool to New York, what's the time frame we want to hit? What are the milestones we want to hit along this journey? How many services do we want to have in the portfolio a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now? What do we want to do with those services once they're in there? How do we get there? What's the means and the vehicles that we're going to use to get there? Now, these 4 things also equate to the 4 P's of strategy. So what is the vision is the equivalent of our perspective. Where are we now is the equivalent of our position, our plans, our patterns. So then the last question, and your kids know this really, really well, are we there yet? Are we there yet? When are we going to reach New York? Well, the answer to that for the people on the Titanic was, unfortunately, for many of them, never. But that's the idea is, when are we going to get there? Are we going to get there in a year? Are we going to have a fully baked portfolio 6 months from now? Set some targets, measure against that. How are we proceeding? How are we moving along that journey? And then perhaps the hardest question, how do we keep the momentum going? That allows you to rinse and repeat and go back and say, is our vision still the same? Do we still want to be and act as this kind of company, whether that's a healthcare company, a retail, a manufacturing, an IT company? Are we still in that business? If we are, just keep moving back through the cycle. Now, in terms of implementing the actual mechanism, it doesn't have to be difficult. The mechanism can be as simple as a spreadsheet. And here I've put an example of a portfolio spreadsheet that I put together. It's simply a list of the services that you offer. What are the various opportunities or market spaces that you're going to play with in that? What's its value proposition? Why does it exist? What value does it bring to the customer? What are the kind of business outcomes does this help support? Is there a business case? Is service number 1 more important to focus on than service number 3? Helps you sort of rank the services in importance, risks and challenges. What kind of different offerings or packages do you have? Now that's going to help you further down the road with service level management by then establishing where the SLAs, the OLAs, and the underpinning contracts need to be written. What kind of money, effort, time, energy, people are you going to put towards this? And then what are sort of the ongoing costs, the pricing, what is this going to take to invest in this? And you can add columns to this out as far as you want. ITIL has a suggestion as a number of pieces of information within this. For sake of time and slides, I didn't include that, but you can look it up in the service strategy book. And this is as simple as it needs to be. Now you'll notice down at the bottom, there's 3 tabs. This is a pipeline. I just simply copy this information over to the catalog and to the retired. And as I move from the pipeline to the catalog, I'm simply moving a service from one tab to another. If you choose to go and use a fancier tool or a more robust system, great, but you don't have to start. So my suggestion, start simple, keep it simple, always begin with something you can use manually. And if you can't do it well manually, having a fancy tool is not going to help you. Right, so you want to be able to do it well manually and then translate that into a tool which will accelerate the speed of doing this effectively. So mechanism, pretty simple. You get to decide what types of information is in there to help you make decisions. These are the ones that I chose. I think they're important, but you don't have to have just these, or you could eliminate some of them. So again, it's all about decision making. Where are you going? What are you going to do with this information, and how are you going to use it? So once you have this portfolio created and you understand that this is a mechanism of information, collecting data, information, and knowledge that you can then turn into wisdom, so there's a tie to knowledge management, you've got this sort of spreadsheet that you're working with, or this table you're working with to make decisions from. Now you have to kind of manage it, and that's where the process of service portfolio management comes in. And here, this kind of helps you decide, again, what is our destination? Where are we going? Here is an advertisement from the White Star Line. Notice it is advertising third-class accommodation steerage. If you are a fan of the movie, this is where Leonardo DiCaprio would have been staying. And notice the largest steamers in the world, the Titanic and the Olympic. Today, like I said, the cruise liners, you could probably fit several Titanics inside one of our modern cruise liners. But technology has improved and things have gotten better. The gentleman on the right, Bruce Ismay. So he was in the movie, if you saw the movie, a tall, lanky gentleman who made the decision that regardless of what was ahead, we're making New York by this day. And he went to the captain and said, full steam ahead, right? He's also, unfortunately, the one that made a lot of the decisions about cutting costs, right? He was very much a short-term thinker. And you can kind of see that in the movie. He rescues himself before he thinks about others. And that was very true. He got quite attacked, I guess is the right word, for that action, that he sort of abandoned the ship, while the architect, a guy named Andrews, actually went down with the ship, and so did the captain. So Bruce Ismay was really short-term thinking, and you want to think long-term, and that's what this process is really about. I love the service management, or the service portfolio management process, because it's simple, straightforward, 4 steps. Start by defining the services. What are the business cases and the information you need around the services? And again, there's lots of information about how to go out and do service design and that. Once I have those services identified, I have to analyze them. Of all of the things that we have, which are the important ones? What are the value propositions? What value, what benefits, what ROI do they bring to the organization and our customers? Then I have to decide, of those ones that I've analyzed, which one am I going to move forward with? And with each one of those, I'm going to put in a change proposal. And that change proposal is that mechanism that sort of triggers the rest of the organization to say, let's start working on this service. So at this point, all the services are ideas. It's really this approval that says, okay, so let's start going to build the service. Let's get all the parts, the pieces, the people, all of those other 4 Ps of service design in place, right? The people, process, products, and partners. Let's get all that going. And then chartering is sort of the official blessing and the official statement that says we are moving forward with this. And the charter then, chartering a service allows you to move it from the pipeline into the catalog. So realize that not everything that comes in through the pipeline in that sort of the define, analyze, approve stages is going to end up in the catalog. You're going to eliminate some because there's no value, it's just not worth it, you're not very good at it, whatever reason there is. And then rinse and repeat with the next set of services. So it's a fairly straightforward kind of process. And here I've just indicated it's very high level in terms of the picture. Now, key to making the whole process work is to have that process manager and the process owner, right? To have those 2 roles, knowing that this person is not only going to maintain the catalog or the portfolio itself, but is going to be a key decision maker and key owner of the decisions in your organization as to which services move from the pipeline to the catalog and which ones are retired. I always describe the manager as being inside the process, so that's the person who's going to be doing the defining, the analyzing, the approving, and the chartering. The owner is outside the process looking in, so they're going to make sure that those steps are being followed, that the manager has the resources and capabilities needed to make those decisions, and that owner is going to kind of have that accountability where the manager is going to have that responsibility. So if you don't have someone who owns the catalog and manage, or the portfolio, excuse me, on a daily basis, you need to get that person, because the process is not going to run itself. You need someone to kind of make those decisions for you. And then you've got to maintain it over its life cycle. So here is a picture of the crew. The gentleman in the front row, second from the right, is the Captain Smith, Charles Smith, captain of the Titanic, and his main crew there. But there's also, I didn't find a really good picture of the White Star Line CEOs, that group, but they're also there, right? So it's this group of people that have been assigned to kind of help make this journey possible, right? They're going to take this information and they're going to be using it to help drive the organization forward. And so you've got to kind of set up a life cycle and connect your portfolio then, as I said, into these other tools and use it as a driver. And the way you want to run this life cycle is basically through these service statuses. So one of the things that one column you can add in to that portfolio is a status portfolio, or a status column, especially in the catalog area, right? That says, where is this service in its life cycle? Is it simply in requirements? Are we defining it? As you can see, there's some steps of the process. Once it's chartered, now it leaves service strategy and it goes into service design. And design and development then take over. Once you've kind of developed and architected the service, then you go into transition. So you've got your build, test, and release stages going on. And then you're going to move from transition into operational and ultimately into CSI. So not only do these statuses tell you where a service is in its existence, it mirrors the service management lifecycle. So basically, to run a service through a lifecycle is to follow the 5 stages of ITIL. Starting with strategy, then you're going to design the service, then you're going to transition it, then you're going to operate it and manage it, and then potentially you're going to either retire it or improve it. And then it's just simply a rinse and repeat kind of cycle. So there's nothing magical, there's nothing new about managing the services. You just have to follow the guidance that's already provided to you through things like ITIL. And then determine, what's the sweet spot for your portfolio, right? The sweet spot for the portfolio is really those things served market. Was there a question, or Lisa? Okay, I heard some noise there, so I was just checking. So the portfolio, right? It's about finding that sweet spot. Where are the fulfillment of needs meeting the impact of the customer, and kind of centering your portfolio there, so that you're understanding where are we overserving, where are we underserving, and where is that sweet spot. And this is going to shift. This is going to change over time. It's not a set it and forget it. It's an ever-changing kind of thing, just like steering a car or steering the Titanic. It wasn't about just putting it on autopilot and going straight to New York. That was the problem, right? Is that they had this idea of all I have to do is put it in place and drive it forward. No, you have to steer the ship. And that means sometimes steering it around the barriers. Hopefully you know those barriers are coming. The owners and the crew of the Titanic knew it was coming, and they chose to ignore it. So just kind of wrapping up a little bit here in summary, some guidance really. I'm not going to read through every one of these, but as you look at the slides, or you get a copy of the slides, right, you're going to want to put good version control in place. You want to make sure that you're not duplicating, so you're not causing confusion. You want to make sure that there's only sort of one version of a service in play at any one point in the portfolio. As you're moving one out, you can move the next version in. Make sure that there is clear understanding of what each status means, so that as you move through the status, you have the right understanding of where something is in the life cycle and what people can expect from that. As you move from the, as I just indicated, as you move through the various requirements down through chartered, you're in the pipeline. As you kind of move out of that, you go into design and into transition, and then into operation, and then CSI. So you're going to want to make sure that you're following that sort of whole life cycle flow for each service. And that's, again, a reason why you want to have somebody who handles this every day, because that information could be changing. Services can move at different rates, different paces through their life cycle, and that takes a bit of accountability and responsibility to manage that. So the moral of the story, is really don't drive a giant ship into an iceberg, right? That's really the moral of the story, especially when you know that the iceberg is out there 2 days ahead of time, right? Make the choices today. Don't make promises of a future you cannot control. Anticipate and prepare for that future by looking at where are you today, where do you want to go, following the guidance from things like ITIL or other service management frameworks. Use the data that you have, convert it to information, convert it to knowledge, and then learn from it. And if you don't have the data to fill your portfolio, go get it. Once you have that, use it as the core for decision making in terms of the SKMS. And then make sure that you're, again, following the guidance from ITIL, following through from requirements down through operational, build the portfolio like you would build any other tool, and treat it like you would any other mechanism. And then make sure you understand the portfolio is dynamic. It's a living, breathing entity that changes and kind of flexes in and out as you increase your presence in the market, as you decrease your presence in the market, and manage that path forward as opposed to letting the path eat you. All right, so I've done a lot of talking at this point. Want to kind of open it up for questions and see what we can uncover in terms of the service portfolio.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I love the analogy of the Titanic. Absolutely love it. And I know that you're a huge history buff, so that made it even more special for me to hear that. I'm thinking, I think maybe they thought that the ship would just go right through the iceberg.
That was some of the thinking, that the ship was built with a strong enough double hull, and most ships today are built with double insulated hulls. The difficulty was, again, some shortcuts. They do know that some of the riveting, they shortcutted on some of the strength of the metal, the quality of the metal. The particular place where the iceberg hit was probably one of the worst places for it to hit it. If it had been further back in the ship, it probably would have been okay.
Yeah, so unfortunate, so tragic. All right. Well, a couple of things. We do have some questions coming in for you, so absolutely, we're going to have some
Excellent.
Q&A for you. And I just wanted to say, I just want to remind people of the next webinar while we have just a little break here. Our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, June 21st, and when the Axelos team is going to join us, and their presentation is titled The Future of ITIL and IT Service Management. And they were supposed to be here this month, but they weren't quite ready to do that. So they're coming in June. And thank you, Mike, for coming in May for us to give us all the information about service portfolio.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. And Axelos has announced plans to update the world's most widely adopted framework for service management in 2018. So this session in June will summarize the update, the ITIL continued relevance as a proven tested framework, and what's happening this year and about the future of the evolution. So please join us for that. I'm sure you don't want to miss that as well. And my colleague Lisa wants to join us. Lisa, are you there?
I am, Michael. Thank you. Only you can do those analogies that well for me, because I know the story of the Titanic and I know portfolio management, and still I learned today. So thank you again. And while Karen's putting the questions together, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are running a little promo here at the Academy for a bundle of our Certified Agile Process Owner and Certified Agile Service Manager courses. If you register for both at the same time, we have a coupon code for 30% off, and that is Agile30 off. And Karen will put that into the Q&A or into the chat, or no, the questions box for you guys. Sorry, she'll throw that in for us in just a minute. And Mike, while Karen's putting them together, tell me your favorite thing about teaching or taking Capo or CASM. Let's give her a minute.
Yeah, so the idea of Agile is a great one, and tying that into service management is really a perfect kind of marriage between the two. And I think there is a bit of connection to this Titanic story, right? Again, if you can run in shorter increments and make decisions in shorter increments, then again, they could have made decisions halfway across the ocean. But the problem was they'd set this sort of long-term goal of making New York, and by gosh, they were not going to wave from that. And that kind of, it's not in good Agile fashion and not in good sort of looking in shorter increments, learning as you go, and that goes right along with portfolio management. So think big, act small.
So this is a really bad joke. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, it created a waterfall. Karen, you ready?
Yes, I am ready. I put the coupon code in the questions, and I also put it in the chat for you. So it's in there if you are looking for that. And also in the chat is the link to the website for downloading the slides. There's a couple of questions on that. They're located on our website, but the link is in the chat. And also the recording will be ready by the end of business tomorrow. And just, Mike, that noise that you heard, that audio you heard, I am in the midst of a thunder and lightning storm. So you will probably be hearing a little of that because it is spring in South Florida, and that's what happens here. Now, Stacy has a question, and she wants to know, do you have a sample of any SPM example spreadsheets that you can share that's downloadable?
I can actually, the one that I showed in the screen, I can share that out through the Academy. It's just something simple that I put together. I just didn't want to jump out of the slide deck to kind of go live into that spreadsheet, but I can share that out.
Okay, perfect. And Jennifer is asking, is there a recommended approach to implement a portfolio when you already have services in place?
Yeah, so you just got to really, it's about the information. So take the information you have about the services already and just put them into the portfolio, right? Use that mechanism, use that spreadsheet, and start building that process. That's the thing I love about ITIL and about the service lifecycle is it's never too late to do a process, right? It's a circle, that the whole thing is a cycle. So at some point in time, you do need to come back, and you can reverse that cycle, right? So if you need to jump backwards and take the services that you've already designed and put them into a portfolio, it's pretty straightforward. Just start filling out the spreadsheet and then apply the process to help you do that. Put in place the management life cycle, and there you go.
Thank you, Mike. And Satoshi has a question saying, great presentation. I agree with using the service life cycle to maintain the service portfolio. However, I believe the SPM process needs to be integrated into other processes such as demand and project management. The challenge is, what do you do if you don't have some standardized processes such as release management, which would help ensure the SPM process is engaged as the service goes from transition to operation? Any suggestions to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, the question is, or the premise is correct, right? So particularly in service strategy, you're not going to do portfolio management distinct from other processes. You should really be doing all 5 of the portfolio or all 5 of the strategy processes at the same time, right? So demand, portfolio, BRM, all of those should be done simultaneously. Ideally, in that perfect world, all of the processes within ITIL would be implemented at the same time, but we all know that's not a reality. So what you're going to have to do is kind of prioritize and roadmap out which things you want to do in which order and start doing little bits of them. Again, it kind of goes back to that agile idea of minimal viable product. So get your portfolio started at least. Then perhaps instead of trying to focus on making your portfolio perfect, step out of portfolio management for a while, build one of these other processes that you need, say release management, and then when you have that to a point, look for the integrations between the two of them. And that's really a maturity level that people forget about, right? So if you look at a maturity curve, 1 through 5, levels 1, 2, and 3 are really about getting an individual process or service mature. Levels 4 and 5 are about making those services and processes work together. So as I said, right, get your portfolio to a point where you're comfortable with it. It has some information, you can make decisions from it. Jump out of that, get in place some of the other processes that you need, like release or demand, and then start looking for the integrations between the two. So you can't integrate 2 processes if they don't exist. So go ahead and start creating at least some baseline versions of your processes, some minimal viable process or just enough process, tie those together, and then mature all of them to that next level. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Mike. Greg is asking, can you provide some suggestions on how to define services?
Yeah, there's a number of webinars and services that I have done and others have done. I'm sure the Academy website probably even has some of those. And the idea is start with a definition. Start with the definition of service. What does a service constitute for your organization? If you don't know how to start for your organization, step back and start with the ITIL definition, right? A means of delivering value. Another definition I've often used is the ability to. So the ability to do claims, the ability to manage patient information, the ability to run retail stores, right? Start with your definitions of what a service is, and then start looking at the kind of activities and actions that you do that match or map to that definition. So if your definition is ability to, right, and we want to have the ability to manage a retail organization, I want to know what kind of things that I do today match to that definition. That's going to tell you the difference between your services and your configuration items, because services are verbs, they're actions, they're not things, right? An application is not a service, an action is. And so what you want to do is what kind of things serve others, what match to that definition, and then that's how you basically start. But like I said, I've got webinars and information that have gone into a whole lot more gory detail than that.
I just threw the link. Thanks, Mike. I just threw the link into the chat box for you guys. And also, I'm going to go look on the ITSM Professor right now because I know there's a couple of blogs about that as well. So look for that link coming across soon too.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. Okay. I have two more questions for you. So if anybody has any more questions, please send them in now. Jennifer is asking, where does the ownership of portfolio management typically lie within the organization? Is it in IT?
This is an interesting question that we encounter a lot of times. So what I want to do is kind of reset your thinking. Instead of thinking about where in the organization it sits, think about what are the skills needed and the skill set and talents needed to run a portfolio. That's the person that you're going to want to have. Now that it doesn't matter where they sit. It doesn't matter whether they're a business person, whether they're an IT person. What you want is the person who has the skills and capabilities to run the portfolio. This is actually true of all processes, and it's why I indicated don't start with the who question. Don't start with what's my organization and who should be doing what. Start with the work that a person needs to do, and then let that tell you the organization. So in this case, this kind of skills that the person needs is decisiveness, decision making, someone who can see big picture, someone who is not literal but more figurative in their thinking, someone who can navigate the organization and work with various stakeholder groups to kind of understand what everybody does and how they do it, and someone who is very customer focused, who sees that the most important thing that an organization does is serve its customers. So think about the types of skills. Who in your organization has that skill set? That's the person who should be your portfolio manager.
Well, that
Mike,
is
that was a great answer. I mean, yeah, wow, you're absolutely. That's a great answer. Thank you.
I've been saying that for 20 years, Lisa, that everybody going into service management focuses too much on their current organization and who should be doing what, as opposed to, well, what's the work? Right? Who's the best person to develop something? Someone who has the capability to develop. Who's the best person to manage something? Someone who can manage things, right? As opposed to some title or some place in an organization. Ultimately, if you read backwards in history to someone like Dr. Deming implies that if you were to work that way completely in an organization, you could remove the need for management. Reality is that's never going to happen. But that is sort of the idea.
You know, by mentioning Dr. Deming, you just made Donna and I smile.
I know. Thank you. I had to throw it in one.
You had to. Appreciate you.
Okay, Mike, I have another question for you from Anand. And Anand is asking, first of all, great presentation, Mike. And given Titanic scenario, isn't rush to reach New York one of the reasons to put the ship into risk? Where does this risk factor, in quotes, one man's wish on sail, taken into consideration in the portfolio, or did they not do enough study on the weakness of the ship based on the weather?
Yeah, so you got a couple things going on there, right? One, risks. So you want to think about two things, risks and challenges, and the Titanic faced both of those. A risk is really something you're unsure about. There's a possibility that it could impact you, but you don't know for sure, right? They didn't know, right? You can't predict the weather. So they didn't know what the weather was like necessarily when they left Liverpool, right? A couple of days later, it could change. Then there are challenges. Challenges are the things you know about. And that was the thing about the Titanic. They got warnings from other ships, the Carpathia and some others, that there was ice floating southward much further than normal for that time of year. April was still a fairly cold time of year to be moving a ship across the ocean, but they chose to take a more direct route because Bruce Ismay had set a date that he had promised people he would be in New York. And that's the problem right there, right, is when you set some kind of thing in stone, some date, you put a stake in the ground, and you're unwilling to change that based on the conditions and the environment you encounter along the journey, right? And that happens way, way, way too much with projects and efforts, right? Is this thing has to be done on this date, or the end of the world is going to happen. Yeah, I really don't think that's probably true. But shouldn't safety have been a much greater concern? And that was a thing, is they threw out the challenges and the risks, and they didn't do that ahead of time and think about that enough to prepare for that. They also believed, part of the problem was there was a belief that they had created the world's greatest ship. And this is where things like testing, so they didn't perhaps do enough testing, they didn't do enough preparation. Again, they had reduced the number of lifeboats. They hadn't really done lifeboat drills effectively, these kind of things. So yeah, lots of lessons to be learned from the Titanic. And these can be, again, applicable to your own portfolio, right? Is if you're waiting to the last minute or you're setting things in stone for the future, you gotta be willing to change. You have to be willing to move the dates. You can't, I always tell my kids, I do not use the word promise lightly. A promise is 100% guarantee that something's gonna happen. And that means I can predict the future and I can't. So I always tell them, I'm going to do my best for you. I can't make an absolute promise most of the time.
Right. Wise words, Mike. Wise words. You know, I don't think they could have effectively have done the drill with the boats, because then people would have been aware that there weren't enough.
Well, so many lessons came out of that. And I know many of the folks in Florida on the Academy group and other people have gone on cruises. A lot of what happens on a cruise today is the result of the lessons learned from the Titanic, right? So sufficient lifeboat training, sufficient lifeboats, you know, better watching of the weather. So they'd rather turn the boat back into safety than, you know, say we're going to make the Bahamas, you know, whatever it takes.
Right. Thankfully.
Yes.
Satoshi has another question saying, I feel in order to keep the momentum going for portfolio, there needs to be value to leadership and management. As an example, it helps them make decisions. How would you recommend a possible quick win to introduce such value?
So the key there is to tie the services into processes like incident and some of the other operational problems, right? And show that by having the information and managing that service through the portfolio, you make it possible to then have more effective incident management, right? You have the capability of writing more effective service level agreements. Actually, the Academy has a great tool, the ROI calculator, that can kind of help you with some of that by saying, if we can reduce the number of incidents down by 10%, here's how much we can save. Well, how do you reduce the number of incidents? By looking at the structure of the service from the portfolio and the catalog and saying, are there improvements we can make? Are there changes we can make to the service? Are there better, more effective ways we can deliver this? Are we using outdated technologies on a service? These kind of things don't come out of incident management. They come out of the portfolio.
I just threw that link in for you guys. And Mike, also just not for you to answer now, but food for thought for the next time you use this presentation. When you were talking about current cruises, so today, if something goes wrong on a cruise ship, you see it on the news, whatever, the first thing I think is like, ooh, I hope those people got their money back, right? Because that's like because the risk has gone to the worst thing that happens kind of is a flood on a cruise ship.
Right.
So there's modernization, and I don't know, just struck the thought. So I wanted to share it with you.
Thank you. Yeah,
that was, I never ever thought, I wonder if the people got their money back from the Titanic. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they didn't.
Yeah.
Right. That was terrible. And just so you know, Lisa's been looking at your chat at the chat panel in your GoToWebinar control panel, because Lisa's put a lot of links in there for some good information to follow up on Mike's presentation, including the ROI calculator that Mike was discussing. So there's lots of them in there. That is all the questions that I have. So if anybody has any last minute questions, please put them in now. And also Eric wanted to say, he said, this is great, and he will definitely be looking out for future webinars. And thank you everyone for that.
Excellent. Yeah, love it. Love it.
Mm-hmm. And Cheryl says, you're too funny, Lisa. Okay, so I'll keep an eye out if anybody has any last minute questions while we're closing the webinar. But just once again, I'd like to remind you that the next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, June 21st, when the Axelos team joins us, and their presentation is titled The Future of ITIL and IT Service Management. And we will be sending you an invitation for the next webinar, so we look forward to having you join us. And as you log out, if you would just take a minute to complete the post-webinar survey, the survey gives you the opportunity to request any webinar topics that you'd like to see presented in the future. And this particular one on service portfolio management was actually a suggestion from our April webinar last month. So we do use your suggestions, and we come in with that. So if you have any topics, please just take a minute. There's just 2 questions on the survey. That's it. And be sure to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for your latest ITSM Academy updates and specials, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more free webinars and inspiration. And there is, thank you, Mike, a great webinar, lots of good information for us. So thank you, Mike, for coming in and joining us today in May. It's always a pleasure to have you, and it's always informative.
All right, my pleasure.
Very entertaining.
Yeah, hopefully everybody got something out of this. That's always my goal.
And Mike Downer, come present for us in a couple of months. Keep your eye out for that one, because I challenged Greg to come up with better analogies than you, and I don't think he can do it.
Okay.
So we'll see.
All right.
Lisa, I lost my audio again in the storm. Did my announcement of the next webinar come through just now?
Yes, ma'am. We're all good. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. Happy weekend, even though it's early.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Lisa.
All right. Take care.
Bye.